some contemporary and important statements and announcements should be made at this time. So I'm going to combine that with what I had in mind for this evening's lecture, and then perhaps we'll make some sense out of it. I well recall a good many years ago when I was teaching at a seminary at a divinity school, wherein as we were making jokes, which always helps in a classroom, and the joke was primarily that a little verse. Jesus was from Jacob's tribe, and four Gospels did his life describe. They are sure a funny lot. Each one has a different plot. So this is supposed to be a funny biblical saying to maybe loosen up the interest of that particular audience. Well, actually, I think there is much to it of a serious nature that might be contemplated, and also that might be applied in a more general way to other scriptures. And what it is in this case is that when we look at important documents, primarily of a spiritual nature, we will soon discover that they have been, or they are in the process of being understood or interpreted in a contemporary way, even though in some cases they reach back way in history, which is certainly true with our Gnostic scriptures. Now, that being the case, this time we will use the same pattern, at least initially, if not later, to apply to the works of H.P. Blavatsky. And some of that I resolved in doing because one of the Quest magazines of recent date, probably a couple of months old, has a large and rather nice article in it about the, I can't quite recall the title, but it's sort of to the effect like the new Blavatsky or the new take on Blavatsky, and that all excited me because while maybe I am attributing too great a merit here to myself, I was certainly one of the people in recent years who called attention to the need for a new Blavatsky. And therefore I said, oh, well, these folk have learned a little bit from me, and therefore I'm going to talk about it. Well, now that may be a little exaggeration in that statement, but it is, nevertheless, it is a fairly important one, and I will begin with that allusion that every great and ultimately influential author in the world book market, whether of a spiritual nature or an other nature, has times when the author will come forth with material that places the earlier authorship, if not exactly in doubt, but places it into a different perspective. Now, there are very few authors who write one book and that's it. I don't belong to them because I think, if I'm not mistaken, I wrote around 6 or 7. Now, of course, they are not all being read very much, to my great chagrin, and therefore, at least one of my books with the new publisher now is contemplating, actually has decided already to republish one of the later books, the one on Gnosticism. So before too terribly long you will get a Gnostic book with a new introduction and a new foreword. My good friend Dr. Lance Owens of Salt Lake City, who has been my advisor in a lot of literary and particularly Jungian things, had promised that he would write a foreword, and being a lifelong medical doctor and a good friend, I can count on that, so I know that will be in there. And then what only remains is an introduction by myself, and let's put it that way. I think I can do it. So anyway, that is the way these things go in the literary world. One of the reasons for this particular development, by the way, being that the Quest publishers has given up the ghost. They are still selling books. They have a big bookstore outside of Chicago where the national headquarters, the Theosophical Society, is. And they have a bookstore there, but they have given up publishing books that they are going to sell. So now I have to work my way around so that my books are still sold, and with that my current complaint, I'm Portnoy, you know, so you remember Portnoy's complaint? You better. It was a dumb book, but it made history, you know. So anyway, let's say this has brought me into the picture again, that I have things to do with those books to promote them further and to continue with their publication. All right. Now, that being done, let's look at something that is of import in this regard. Let's see. We know that books are still one of the principal sources of information on various topics, including some of the more difficult ones, some of the more seldom published ones, and that therefore we need to look over these subjects with some interest, and an interest for the future as well. Because I know if I had a past judgment over my own books, which probably would have been disastrous, I would have picked the Gnostic Jung and the 7 Sermons to the Dead, because that was really the book mostly to my heart, and I felt that that definitely should be republished. And perhaps when now the next most popular book, the book on Gnosticism, will be republished, I think the chances of some of the earlier ones to be made available will increase. Now then, let us look a little on this entire subject. The prospects of books related to Gnosticism and to subjects of a very similar kind is with us and is increasing. In fact, since the publication of my own book on Gnosticism, a whole bunch of other books, not by myself, I am sorry to say, have been published, and I think it will be useful if those of us who have some acquaintance with the subject will continue to make their own views of it available and thereby spread the possible interest in the subject which should be spread. So therefore, I am glad that these things are happening. Now, coming a little bit back to the beginning of our subject, we need to keep in mind that there are people in the world, and I consider at least as of this evening, because I'm still in the body at the age of 94, so I can confess to it that there are those of us who have studied both in an academic manner and in other ways the subject of Gnosticism and of early Christianity, and that therefore it will be a good idea if we come through with further expositions and explanations of that subject, because believe it or not, even though that is not known to most of us, the subject of the Gnosis and its various branches is quite in the public mind. There are books published on this subject. There are courses, academic courses on this subject, and all of this indicates that there is certainly still more to be known about this curious subject, which sometimes is called Gnosis, which is the experience of transcendental knowing, or Gnosticism. Now, that being the case, let me try to switch gears now and try to apply the same principle to Blavatsky, as I have already a few times, because on some of the Blavatsky lectures I did bring in the possibility of a further continuation of Blavatsky's work, as well as, let's say, additional material, insights producing material on Blavatsky and on her mission that could be and that should be continued. Now, so now I'll jump to Blavatsky. but with the understanding that this was, at least in my opinion, and that's why I am here talking to you tonight, that it is really my opinion that Blavatsky and her works are the most lucid, most generally understood works on 19th century occultism, by which I mean the kind of occultism that was published in the 19th century, because as you know, dear Madame Blavatsky died just on the cusp of the 19th to the 20th century, and therefore her literary work fell within that time period. So let us then try to take a look at what has been known and is still known in very brief outline form of Madame Blavatsky's works. Madame Blavatsky created, first of all, and maybe last of all, a cosmology. A cosmology is an approach to the nature, the beginning, the continuation, and the potentials of a description of the cosmos. So how did the universal being, often referred to by the Greek word cosmos, come into being? As far as we are able to determine how did it become into being? And moreover, how did little old heavy-set and heavy-smoking Madame Blavatsky, how come that she, of all people, had, if you can use that term, latched on to this absolutely strange and at that time totally recondite subject, and how she brought it to the attention to the public. But not only that, but what kind of evaluation, what kind of foretelling of the future of these of her own works did she put forth prior to her death? Because unless we have some idea at least of all of these, then we are really having a very faulty vision. So first of all, as you may recall, there is her great cosmological work that's published sometimes in three big thick volumes, and sometimes in a lot more volumes than that. I have one that is, I think, around 10 volumes, and that has been parked on the woodwork of my bed for many years, so that when I want to get interested in something, I can just reach up and pull up one of the books, and I can look at them, and I get really stimulated and interested in that fashion. Yeah, I have also, for a similar purpose, her big book or 2-volume book, because it was published in both ways, that was published first, Isis Unveiled, and I like to say with some pride, not of my own personal pride, but pride of our California and of our Los Angeles, that it was published, typeset, published, bound from A to Z here in Los Angeles by 2 of her friends who, as God would have it, were both very adept typesetters and printers, the Price brothers, Pryse, he. One of the prize porters, James Morgan Price, had also written a number of books himself, no doubt inspired by Blavatsky, which are still being published, and I don't need to go into too much of them, but one of them is an interpretation of the Book of Revelations in occult terms, where all the big cities of Revelation are revealed to be, among other things, as I think James Price did not insist on his interpretation alone, but the seven cities of the Book of Revelation, and which James Price has taken from the Book of Revelation, but then interpreted in a not entirely, but partly symbolic way, as the symbolic interpretation of the Book of Revelation. It's really quite an interesting book. And then there is another one which is an interpretation of the four Gospels, which he also did. So you can see he was somewhat grabbed by Blavatsky's approach to the deeper things, and he published his own books thereby, which of course wasn't such a big trouble with him, since he had his own he and his brother had their own publishing company, which to tell you the truth always helps with such things. So if you're about to publish some books and you're not finding a publisher, then write out your own manuscript, form your own publishing company and go ahead. It can be done. I didn't do it because I had the Theosophical Society, my good friends, to do it for me. And I was already a long-time member and had my entry there, so to say. But let us say that was the beginning, really, in a lot of ways, of this sort of thing. So Blavatsky started the ball rolling, which in this case ended up being interpretations of the Book of Revelation and others, and also a completely novel and huge work which came to be called the Secret Doctrine. So I mentioned already that the Secret Doctrine is a cosmological work of mythic overtones. Now, what do I mean by that? A lot of works of esoteric mythology, including the most famous ones like King Arthur and the Round Table and so forth, all of these were originally planned to be a mixture of esoteric philosophy, cosmology, and legendary, mythological legendary. The late Joy Mills, who was a prominent theosophist for many years and whose friendship I have enjoyed. She's the one who sent me to Australia to lecture in various things like that. Mr. Joy Mills had often said that the Secret Doctrine is a myth. Now, you know, to most people in our culture, the interpretation of that word myth is that it is not true. So, let's see, what was our great mythologist? Yes, Joseph Campbell. And Joseph Campbell was telling a story of in Miami, I think, where he was lecturing. No, he was not lecturing. He was same thing. He was speaking on the radio. He was invited for a radio program, and the upshot of it was that the interviewer asked him rather superciliously, "Well, Mr. Campbell, why are you so interested in myth? Don't you know that a myth is a lie?" Well, needless to say, I think Mr. Campbell no longer had too much to do with that particular radio host, but whatever the case may be, let's say the most popular, the most long-lived mythic tales in the world, in every culture and in every language, are in the nature of tales which contain an immense amount of transmittable truth. In other words, it is not that they are not true, but quite to the contrary, they are true on another level of understanding than we ordinarily look at. That is why if you read the Arthurian myths, you see that there is a retelling there in story form of great philosophical and even mystical truth. And that is how Joseph Campbell, whom I knew a little bit, understood them, and that is how he practiced them, and that is why he became probably the prime mythologist, at least on our continent, of our age. He was extremely insightful, extremely important, and also availed himself of the interpretations and approaches to myths by others, especially the great Dr. Carl Jung, who was really the greatest psychologically inclined interpreter of myth. And it was his approach to myth that inspired Campbell, that inspired many other of the greatest mythologists of the 20th century. So, these are important issues, because if we see how somebody else did something, and did it well, and did it very well, that gives us inspiration how we might do something well, and perhaps very well. And I think that is certainly true of Campbell and of a lot of other people, and we ought to pay attention to it. Now I know that I had initially promised you to speak of Rosicrucianism, which belongs into this portion of the lecture, and which we will definitely do. Because Rosicrucianism, in my not so humble opinion, played in many respects the same identical role in the history of our culture then there played other great mythic themes and mythic interpretations, and for that reason occupied its place as the great and perennially valid myth of our culture. Now, maybe you have the same kind of unfortunate opinion. Why would anybody bother with a myth when everybody knows that a myth is a lie? Well, first of all, not everybody knows that unfortunate statement, but it means that very important truths of history, truths of psychology, truths of many different valuable subjects will be found in the great myths of humanity, of whatever culture they happen to be. And in fact, one of the greatest authors in terms of greatness being value of Indian mythology of India was written by a teacher and an associate of Joseph Campbell, the history of Indian mythology. And here I am, I can't remember the name of the author, but...
Would it be Idris Shah?
Excuse me?
Idris Shah? No?
The
author, Idris Shah? No? Because I know Joseph Campbell...
Yeah, there is a big book written in the earlier part of the century by a German university professor whose wife was part Jewish and who therefore was expelled by Hitler. And what was his name? Anyway, it will come to me. And he wrote one very, very cogent, smallish book, which is a collection of extensive essays on mythic themes, and the other one, a great big book called Indian Mythology, and his name was Heinrich Zimmer. There you are. You get the prize, whatever the prize is. Obviously, yeah. Yeah, it was Heinrich Zimmer, yeah. And his wife was a direct descendant, I think, a granddaughter of Hugo von Hofmannsthal, who was a great German poet and writer and mythologist, and who was part Jewish. And this was his downfall. So he had to come to America because of his wife, and then he got a very bad influenza in New York and died. That was the story of Heinrich Zimmer. But his books, I think, are very, very worth studying, and particularly Joseph Campbell valued them very, very highly. He considered Heinrich Zimmer the greatest mythologist of our age. That is, of course, when he kept quiet about himself. In any event, so we need to keep in mind that when a story, when a tale, whatever else we want to call it, is designed and does work primarily by way of its mythic content. By the mythic content, I mean that by reading that particular or hearing that particular myth, you are awakened to the living myth within yourself. At least that was the view of Joseph Campbell, of Heinrich Zimmer, and of many, many great mythologists. So in that, I think that is a description that we may wish to keep in mind. So let's put it this way. The myth is of very, very ancient origin. And when someone begins in the ancient way to tell you, oh, all right, let me tell you a story. He's telling that story, which is his story, and which in all likelihood is your story. And that is the mythos, the story. So that needs to be kept in mind in this particular case, of course, also. So now, why I brought that up is that the mythic stories of our culture, both those of more recent authorship, such as the one that I mentioned, and both those of really ancient authorship, going back to the Greeks, going back to the Persians, the poor souls who are now getting such a bad deal, and so forth. These containers of the myth have been the carriers of the profundities of the human spirit for thousands of years. And if we don't recognize that, then there's something wrong with us. Not with the myth, but with us. So I think it's a good idea to keep that in mind. And not to do the kind of stupid insisting that, a myth is not anything true. It is true at a deeper level of understanding. And this is true of many things in life. Any one of yours I could pick, but I'm not going to because I don't want to embarrass you. And try to impel you and compel you to bring forth a myth of your own life, or of the life of some people whom you knew very well, and show how that myth, that mythological treatment, indicates the future in that person's life, the present in that person's understanding and undertaking, and in many cases the mythologems, which is just a mythological statement of the future. Because that is how a myth works, and that is why to say that it is untrue is a terrible, terrible thing to do, but obviously I think people are beginning to find out already that that's what it is. In any event, now what do we have in this particular case? My first encounter with much of the Western mythology, not the Hungarian mythology because that's something of its own, but the mythology of Western culture came from an encounter in the city of my studies, where I finished my pre-university training and my university training in Innsbruck, Austria. In Innsbruck there is a beautiful park, the city park, and in the middle of the city park is a circular, sometimes they call it a chapel, sometimes they call it something else, anyway, a circular building. And in the middle of the circular building is a metal catafalque, a great metal the tomb of something very important, somebody was once very, very important, really the actual founder of the Holy Roman Empire, namely Rudolf I of Habsburg. Here there is cast in metal, and around him stand 12 big, tall metal statues. And these are all his real or imagined ancestors. People like King Arthur of the Round Table fame, many others. It's a beautiful place. The Instructions call it the Schwarzenmandel. If you speak a little Tyrolean German, the black men. They are all made of black bronze. They are bigger than life, and they surround the tomb of the emperor. It is also to just inform you of my own predilections. It is one of the few places, that park, where I got so drunk that I could not leave the park until maybe about 11 in the morning. So you see, that's the kind of people we are. We Gnostics have to know. Even if the knowledge is in the bottom of a bottle, and even if it is in the middle of the city of Innsbruck, which I think is one of the most charming cities in the world. I'm 94 years old. It's not very likely that I will get back there, but it will always be in my psyche. It will always be in my brain and in my heart. The city on the Enns, Innsbruck, under the big, beautiful, snowy mountains, with the Enns River flowing by, and being more interesting things than you can shake a stick at if you find out. It really was. I'm so glad for that period of my life that I couldn't be happier. In any event, now why did I bring that up? I think I brought it up because that is where the black men, who are all mythologically conceived by the literati as the ancestors of King Arthur. You see, Arthur is there among them, and so it sort of indicates here was the great emperor who founded basically the Holy Roman Empire, although others might have a claim on it too, and who had as his forebears, as his ancestors, the most insightful, the most powerful, the most gloriously inspired heroes and literati in the world. Because when the complete Arthurian cycle is thus described, then we are really describing the Arthurian cycle. I mean, I don't know whether any of those old boys lived or not, but they live in Innsbruck as the black men, and they live in our minds as the heroes whom we carry forward. And when we go there and we look at them and we see who this depicts and that depicts, it puts us in touch with a reality that ordinarily is not available to us. And it is my not so humble opinion that reality is of incredibly great influence, incredibly great importance, and that if anybody has the opportunity in this lifetime between birth and 94 to get into that world of Arthur and the great Arthurian cycle should do so, because you will get something there that you won't get in the history books, and I read many of them, and will not get anywhere else, only there, because something comes from there that's not that you won't find in the Encyclopedia Britannica. I just remembered that my 20-some volumes of the Encyclopedia Britannica year 22 are in our library against the next wall. They are there because I put them there. I didn't want them to be damaged. I didn't want them to be lost. Because there also, if you can read between the lines, you find the greatest, the most important, the most inspiring kind of literature that exists in this world, the myth. Mythos, as the Greeks would call it. Now, after all that paean of praise, let me then say that what we have therefore here is something very interesting and very important. And as we come closer to the myth, whether it is the Arthurian myth, whether it is the myth of the emperor in Innsbruck or anyone else, let us keep it in mind that where our attention, where our wisdom, where our goodness is truly and abidingly attracted, that is the truth. And if we don't mind growing a little theological, there is God. Because God has revealed himself in the myth. What do you think the Old Testament is? It's a great, big, complicated myth, but one that has meaning, one that has extension, one that tells you something for today, for tomorrow, and for the day after tomorrow. Now, I have preached my sermon, and so we can go on a little further than that. So what I mean to say at this point is that if we look upon the great tales of the culture with vision, with insight, with a sense of poetry, and this is not often understood, because the Rosy Cross, the entire legends of the Rosy Cross that came out of the town of Calf in Westphalia and the other German places, these are extremely important. Not just for history, not just for Germany, not just for Oceanside, but for us, right now and in the future. Now, that being the case, let's look a little bit further now in how these might be of present-day use to us. I think this is a part of my talk that I didn't polish before, so now I have to think about it. But what I think I meant was that try to utilize any tale, any story as your myth for that time, either for that day or for that week or for that year or for that century. It is there. If it contains true mythic elements, whether it even is science fiction or whatever it is, because there too, those are the modern and hyper-modern myths. And we need to understand them also up to the point that we can understand them. If we do, then we will have learned something, not just about Alpha Centauri and about Star Trek and things like that, but about ourselves. Because this is where the stars are. This is where the sun and the moon shine in our own star, in our own star. And if we take the messages that come to us from these stories, if they come to us directly, if they come to us without the censorship of politics, the censorship of all kinds of balderdash that this world produces, and it comes right to our hearts, then it has come to the throne of God in us. Why? Because that's what the ancients believed. That's what the ancients not only believed, but what the ancients knew. And that is what is described in the first stanzas of the secret doctrine. Let me just a minute, You don't think as quickly as in 94 that you did at 9 o'clock, 9 or perhaps, but you can think of it, because somehow inside of us are all the myths gathered together. Who gathered them together? We cannot answer that, but they are there, and they speak to us, and they say, I am Arthur, the once and future king. I am the one who came and who will come again, and who will help you, and who will teach you how to be a hero and how to be a just king, and on in that way. They speak to us. They speak to us individually, and they speak to us the truth, because they are teachers of the Gnosis. And this is extremely important. And that is what you need to keep in mind in connection with the Arthurian myths or things of that sort. Look, these stanzas, these verses speak to you. They have been written for you, maybe sometimes thousands of years ago, but they have been written to you. They said, look, this is your myth, this is your story, and if you will live this through, then you will have done well. Many have tried, and many have failed, but also many have tried and have succeeded. Homer, Alexander the Great, all the great myth makers and living, those who live the myth in this world, have brought it to us, and they are still here. So we need to keep it in mind. Now, what does that have to do with the Rosicrucians? Well, because they have a myth. And it's composed of the great mythic elements of the Rosy Cross, the three great volumes. And if you look at them, and if you allow their message to come to you, it will do something. It will awaken your mythological self, your deific self, your self that Madame Blavatsky wrote about. He says, here it is within you. Look at it, listen to it. Listen to it at night when you go to sleep. Listen to it in the morning when you wake up. Why? Because this is the truth, not just a truth. Go to the scientists today, go to the historians, go to the journalists, go to the fellows whom I listen to all day long on the radio, and get you get a little stimulus there. It is something that talks to you. And if you have listened to it properly, then it has taken root in you. And that root will grow into a magnificent tree. It will go into an entire vegetation of wisdom, into the place where the eternal truth, the eternal gnosis, the eternal wisdom grows its own trees. And in these trees is truth, is wisdom, is the best information that you can get. There are other sources of information, and certainly one should avail oneself of them. But the ones that come to you as a glorious story, like the book of Genesis, I don't believe a single word in that, but I think it's important because it speaks to something in here that says, oh yes, speak to me some more, because you are Gnosis, and if you are, then you are the one that you have been seeking. So now then, the time is moving with us, so I have to maybe get a little bit ahead of myself, and while it won't be precisely the Rosy cross, it is still there, because on that cross there hangs something, and it is not a dead man, it is a living flower, the living flower of humanity, which you can embody, which you can pay attention to. And if you do, then all is well. Then you will move where you need to move. Let me then just add that this is really only an introduction to the story. But the introduction is that you have within you the great myth, the myth of Gnosis, whether it comes to you as Sophia, whether it comes to you as Christ, whether it comes to you as Jupiter, whether it comes to you as Krishna, it will come to you and it will do what it is supposed to accomplish. It is supposed to wake you up. It is supposed to bring you to the golden gate of truth, because that is the opening to Gnosis. And that is what it has always been. Whether you look into the writings of the ancients, whether you look into the Greek myths, whether you look at the Egyptian myths, whether you look into Babylon or anywhere, it's always there, and it says to you, look, I am the truth. I am the Gnosis. I am the one who knows, and I am anxious to enter into you even more powerfully than I ever have before, because my task and your task are the same, to become wise, to become filled with the knowledge of the things that are, as it has been called. And if you acquire that, then you haven't been here for no reason. Then everything written in the secret doctrine, which is really often very delightful, has been written for you, so as to awaken something great and wonderful and true inside of you, and from there be able to spread to others. The Gnosis, the truth, the reality, the eternal myth. It is here, it is still coming to us, And it will win the day, it will win the night, it will win everything. Because it always had in the past, and it will do so again. So I thank you very much for having been here. And with or without the Rosy cross, I have a feeling that I have sort of started something, so that maybe I will do some more of this. Whether I will or not, thank you for being here, because this is, in its essence, is an extremely important thing. Extremely important. It's important everywhere. It's important from Tibet to the outback in Australia. It is true to everywhere and everywhere, because it is the truth. It is the great story. It is the doctrine that was secret and that is now becoming open. And from that open disclosure will come our ultimate redemption, our instruction, and our entry into eternity and greatness and fullness. And thank you very much.